It's said that in the dead of night, when the streets are empty and the moon hides behind a veil of clouds, the smiling man prowls the dark alleys of American cities. Those who've seen him say his grin is wide, too wide, and his eyes, unblinking, follow your every move. No one knows where he came from, but everyone knows the rule. If you see him, don't smile back. No one who has ever done so has lived to tell the tale. Some stories are meant to be left untold, but for four friends in Chicago, curiosity was stronger than fear. And soon, they'd wish they had never heard of the Smiling Man. The story of the Smiling Man had circulated around the internet for years. Videos, blog posts, and news articles recounted the strange encounters. Some described him as tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that looked out of place, like a character plucked from the 1950s. His face, however, was unforgettable. That grotesque smile stretched across his face as if it were carved there, never fading, never faltering. For most people, the Smiling Man was nothing more than a creepy urban legend, something to scare kids with, a topic for late-night YouTube deep dives. But for others, the stories hit closer to home. Witnesses spoke of late-night sightings, followed by weeks of paranoia and dread. Some claimed he haunted their dreams, his smile etched into their minds, leaving them unable to sleep. For Max, Emma, Ben, and Rachel, the legend was just that, a legend. Until one fateful night changed everything. It was a typical Friday evening in downtown Chicago. The four friends were celebrating Ben's recent promotion at a local bar. The drinks flowed freely, and as the night went on, their conversation shifted to ghost stories and urban myths. "Have you guys heard about the Smiling Man?" Rachel asked, leaning in conspiratorially. Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of the macabre. Ben scoffed. "You mean that internet meme? The guy with the weird face who supposedly follows people around? It's just a bunch of fake stories." Max nodded, agreeing. "Yeah, I've seen those videos. They're all staged. People do anything for views these days." But Emma, always the curious one, seemed intrigued. "I don't know, guys. I read a story once where someone described seeing him in real life. The details were disturbing." "What kind of details?" Rachel asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Emma hesitated, glancing around as if the Smiling Man himself might be listening. "The person said they saw him on an empty street, just staring and grinning. When they tried to ignore him and keep walking, he started following them. But no matter how fast they went, he was always just a step behind. And when they finally turned to confront him, he just stood there, still smiling. The worst part? They said he whispered their name." A chill ran through the group. For a moment, no one spoke. Ben broke the silence, laughing it off. "Come on, you guys don't seriously believe this, right? It's just a stupid story. Besides, even if he was real, what's he gonna do? Smile us to death?" The others laughed nervously, but the mood had shifted. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. "Why don't we prove it?" Ben said suddenly, his tone challenging. "Let's go out and see if we can find him. I mean, it's all fake, right?" "Are you insane?" Emma looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Rachel, on the other hand, was intrigued. "How would we even find him? The city's huge." "Simple," Ben replied, a mischievous grin on his face. "We go to the places people claim they've seen him. The old theater district, those alleys near the river. We just need to be out late enough, and who knows?" Max hesitated. "This sounds like a really bad idea." "Come on, Max, don't be a chicken," Ben taunted. "It's just a story." After a moment of deliberation, Emma sighed. "Fine, but if we see anything weird, we're leaving. Got it?" The group agreed, and after a final round of drinks to bolster their courage, they set out into the night, completely unaware of the horror awaiting them. They walked for hours, making their way through dimly lit streets and deserted alleys. The city was eerily quiet, the only sounds their footsteps echoing against the buildings. As they ventured deeper into the old theater district, a sense of unease settled over them. "This is stupid," Max muttered. "We're not going to find anything." Just as the words left his mouth, they heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a low humming, like someone singing a lullaby. "Did you guys hear that?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. They all stopped, straining to listen. The humming continued, growing slightly louder. It was coming from somewhere up ahead around the corner of an alley. Ben, his curiosity getting the better of him, gestured for the others to follow. "Come on, it's probably just a homeless guy." But as they rounded the corner, what they saw froze them in their tracks. There, standing in the middle of the alley, was a man. He was tall and lanky, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that looked out of place in the modern city. His back was to them, but even from behind, there was something disturbingly off about him. His posture was rigid, almost unnatural, and he seemed to sway ever so slightly as he hummed. Ben took a step forward, his bravado fading. "Hey man, you okay?" The humming stopped. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the man turned around. And there it was, that smile. It stretched across his face, impossibly wide, like someone had carved it into his skin. His eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to pierce through them. Rachel let out a choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God!" The smiling man stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on them. And then, without warning, he began to move. It wasn't a normal walk. His legs seemed to glide, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. Max stumbled back, panic flooding his senses. "We need to go, now!" But before they could turn, the smiling man stopped, his head tilting slightly to the side as if studying them. And then he spoke, his voice a sickly sweet whisper that sent shivers down their spines. "Why are you here?" His grin never wavered, his eyes never blinking. Ben tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Finally, he managed to stammer. We were just looking around." The smiling man's grin widened, if that was even possible. "Looking for me, perhaps?" The group stood frozen, terror rooting them in place. The smiling man took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with a twisted amusement. "Do you want to play a game?" he asked, his voice dripping with malice. Emma, tears streaming down her face, shook her head violently. "No, please, just let us go." The smiling man's expression didn't change, but there was a hint of something darker in his eyes. "But you came to find me, didn't you? And now that you're here, we have to play." He took another step forward, his presence suffocating, overwhelming. The friends backed away, their minds screaming at them to run, but their legs felt like lead. "I'll make you a deal," the smiling man continued, his voice a haunting melody. "If you can make it out of this alley without looking back, I'll let you go." Max glanced at the others, his heart pounding. It sounded too simple, too easy, but they didn't have a choice. "Go," the smiling man whispered, his grin widening. "Run." And they did. They sprinted down the alley, their breaths ragged, their hearts racing. The darkness seemed to close in around them, the shadows twisting and stretching like clawed hands. The alley felt endless, each step echoing louder and louder in their ears. "Don't look back," Max shouted, his voice breaking. But the urge to turn to see if the smiling man was following was almost unbearable. Every fiber of their being screamed at them to look, to confirm that they were safe. And that was when they heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, following them. "He's right behind us," Rachel cried, her voice filled with panic. "Keep going!" Ben yelled, his legs burning as he pushed himself harder. The alley twisted and turned, and with each corner they rounded, the sense of dread grew. The smiling man's footsteps never faltered, never quickened. He was toying with them, letting them think they had a chance. Finally, they saw it. The end of the alley, the streetlights beyond a beacon of hope. They poured on the speed, their eyes locked on the exit. But just as they were about to reach it, a voice, low and sinister, drifted through the air. "Turn around." It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion, a whisper that slithered into their minds, planting seeds of doubt. What if he was right there, just inches away? What if he was going to grab them, drag them back into the darkness? Rachel faltered, her steps slowing. I can't. Don't listen to him," Max shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. "Keep going." With a final burst of strength, they broke free of the alley, stumbling onto the street. They didn't stop running until they were several blocks away, collapsing onto a park bench, gasping for breath. We made it," Ben panted, his face pale and drenched in sweat. But the relief was short-lived. As they sat there, catching their breath, a cold realization washed over them. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Where's Rachel?" They turned, their eyes widening in horror. Rachel was gone. Panic gripped them as they frantically searched the area, calling her name, their voices breaking with fear. But there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. "We need to go back," Emma sobbed. "We can't just leave her." Max shook his head, his face etched with terror. "No, he'll be waiting for us. He got her." "But she didn't look back," Ben insisted, his voice cracking. "She was right behind us. She didn't look back." The truth hung heavy in the air. The smiling man's game had never been about looking back. It had been about fear, about control, and he had won. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of Rachel. The police conducted searches, interviewed witnesses, but there was nothing. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. The friends drifted apart, the guilt and fear too much to bear. Ben moved away, unable to face the city that had swallowed Rachel whole. Emma became a recluse, her once vibrant spirit crushed by the weight of what they had done. Max tried to move on, but the nightmares never stopped. Every night he dreamed of the smiling man, that grotesque grin, those empty eyes. And always, in the background, he could hear Rachel's voice calling for help, trapped in the darkness. Then, one night, as Max lay in bed, he heard it, a soft, familiar humming. His blood ran cold as he sat up, his heart hammering in his chest. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's not real. It's just a dream." But as the humming grew louder, he knew. It wasn't a dream. Slowly, his body shaking, he turned his head.